In the grand tradition of adventure literature, the epic tale of conquest is typically narrated by the conqueror, the unflinching hero whose courage provides a flawless filter for the terrifying unknown. Yet, Jules Verne makes a radical, profound psychological choice in Journey to the Center of the Earth. The story is told by Axel, a perpetually anxious, reluctant student who would prefer the quiet certainty of his Hamburg study over the chaos of the subterranean world. This is the narrator's paradox, and it holds the key to the novel's enduring emotional power. The traditional hero model is perfectly embodied by Professor Otto Lidenbrock: pure willpower, scientific certainty, and relentless courage. Had Lidenbrock narrated the story, it would have been a monotonous logbook, a succession of measurements and triumphs, devoid of emotional resonance. Lidenbrock would have only recorded the distance conquered, he would never have recorded the terror endured. Verne's genius lies in asking, why reject the hero's voice for the student's fear? The answer is relatability factor. Lidenbrock is aspirational but alienating, Axel is fearful but profoundly relatable. We, the readers, trust the narrator who openly admits his terror, who meticulously records every instance of self-doubt and paralyzing anxiety. Axel's emotional vulnerability grants the reader a crucial, relatable entry point into the sublime terror of the journey. We explore the Earth's depths not through the eyes of a mad genius, but through the eyes of the terrified ordinary man we all are. Crucially, Axel's fear serves as the true measure of danger, it is the emotional barometer that accurately calibrates the colossal scale of the environment. When Axel, who struggles with basic claustrophobia, screams in panic, we understand the true, overwhelming physical pressure of the Earth's interior better than any barometric reading could convey. His escalating anxiety is a precise reflection of the escalating risk. The descent into the absolute darkness is terrifying not because the professor says so, but because Axel's internal conflict and escalating anxiety transform the journey into a psychological thriller. This fear is also the foundation of psychological honesty. It strips away the intellectual facade that Lidenbrock constructs. The professor's scorn for his nephew's emotional vulnerability proves that Lidenbrock views fear as a weakness to be suppressed, not a necessary, honest response to the unknown. Axel's constant lamentations, his worry about water, heat, and direction, are not cowardice, they are rational questions that the heroic Lidenbrock willfully ignores in his obsessive pursuit. Imagine the narrative tension if Lidenbrock simply wrote, "We proceeded downward with efficient speed." Axel, however, writes, "I thought my skull would crack from the pressure, and I begged my uncle to turn back, but he merely shouted at me." The former is a scientific note, the latter is a terrifying, high-stakes human drama. The tension of the entire novel is created not by the geological obstacles, but by the question of whether Axel's sanity, and thus the narrative itself, will survive the overwhelming experience. The conclusion of this phase is clear, the story achieves its greatness not for the fact of the conquest, but for the anxiety of the attempt. Verne chose a coward's compass to guide us, knowing that reluctant heroes are the only ones capable of delivering the unvarnished truth about an epic exploration. Lidenbrock is the physical catalyst, but Axel is the vital, vulnerable voice that gives the journey its enduring, frightening heart. Axel's anxiety is not a narrative flaw, it is a meticulously crafted dramatic and scientific instrument. It functions as the expedition's most reliable internal technology, the thermometer of terror. Unlike Lidenbrock's faulty mechanical thermometer, Axel's increasing fear correlates precisely and instantly with the increasing danger, validating the magnitude of the challenges in a way no calibrated scale could. When the explorers begin the descent into absolute darkness, Axel's acute claustrophobia instantly validates the physical pressure of the Earth. His sense of suffocation and physical crushing is the immediate, visceral evidence that the environment is hostile. His internal struggle confirms the external threat, proving that the body, when listened to, is a far more honest barometer than any machine carried in a leather case. This honesty is particularly vital when confronting technological failure. Axel's anxiety mirrors the uselessness of the compass, the chronometer, and the geological models. While Lidenbrock struggles to rationalize the erratic readings, Axel's fear of technological failure simply translates the scientific chaos into human terms: we are lost. His dread is a clear, intuitive judgment on the collapse of their methodology. It is an emotional verdict that is immediately trustworthy. Lidenbrock's lack of fear, conversely, is exposed as an emotional blind spot that makes him unreliable and reckless. The professor often charges ahead into dangerous tunnels or dismisses the threat of acid water because his intellectual pursuit shields him from necessary self-preservation. He is emotionally anesthetized by his obsession. This emotional deficit makes him a poor witness and a dangerous leader. The crisis of the separation proves the ultimate utility of instinctual fear. When Axel is lost and alone, he is not rescued by Lidenbrock's precise map reading or calculations. He is guided back by his own sheer, instinctive terror. He uses the sound of his own voice, a raw, natural phenomenon, and a desperate instinct to avoid permanent isolation. His survival depends on the immediate, uncalculated response of a frightened animal. Instinctive fear as navigation, a far more successful tool than any spinning compass. When they reach the underground sea, Axel's horror at the prehistoric monsters measures their unnaturalness. Lidenbrock classifies the ichthyosaurus. Axel feels the existential dread of seeing a life form that should not exist in the present, a chilling validation of the time prison horror. Axel's psychological dread is an accurate gauge of the world's deviation from the natural evolutionary order. Furthermore, Axel's perspective alone captures the philosophical depth of the journey. He records the fear of repetition, the philosophical dread about eternal recurrence that Lidenbrock never reaches. Lidenbrock is content to classify the rock layers. Axel is terrified by the thought of his own consciousness trapped in an eternal, unchanging loop. This high-level anxiety elevates the novel beyond a simple adventure into a profound work of dark psychology. The contrast with Hans Bjelke is also illuminating. The guide's lack of fear is not intellectual denial, it is a function of pure non-will and unthinking competence. Hans is so utterly integrated with the natural environment that he registers danger as mere data, not a psychological crisis. He is the efficient, animal response, Axel is the anxious, cognitive response. Both are successful survivors, but only Axel provides the necessary emotional honesty for the reader. In conclusion, Axel never sanitizes the terror for the sake of manufactured bravery. His vulnerability is the narrative's greatest strength, making his perspective the true, unvarnished truth of the adventure. His terror is not an obstacle to be overcome, but the only reliable metric the reader possesses to comprehend the vast, magnificent dangers encountered. Axel is not a traditional adventurer, but he is a hero nonetheless. His is a passive heroism, a profound determination to follow despite overwhelming terror. This is arguably a higher form of courage than Lidenbrock's, which is fueled by manic ego. Axel is not driven by the hope of glory, but by love, loyalty, and the quiet, stubborn refusal to abandon his family. His is a courage born of necessity and moral commitment, whereas Lidenbrock's courage is born of intellectual vanity. The real narrative arc of the novel is not the descent to the center coordinates, it is the internal journey of Axel's conquest of his own anxiety. He does not eliminate his fear, he learns to live alongside it, to operate through it. This internal victory, achieved amidst claustrophobia, thirst, and existential dread, is far more resonant than the professor's physical triumph. Lidenbrock conquers a mountain, Axel conquers his own mind. Crucially, Axel's moments of decisive action are always reactive, rooted in love, not ego. When he tries desperately to save Lidenbrock from his own recklessness, or when he scrambles to assist during a crisis, his motivation is purely humane. This contrasts starkly with Lidenbrock, whose actions are perpetually egocentric, motivated by the need to record, classify, and prove his own superiority. Axel's gentle perspective provides the essential ethical critique Lidenbrock lacks. The quiet dignity of the anxious student constantly moralizes the expedition. This dynamic flips the central relationship. Lidenbrock's dependence on Axel goes far beyond the need for a diligent recorder. The professor relies on Axel not just to record, but to maintain human connection and anchor his own sanity. Axel, the frightened nephew, is the professor's last tether to humanity. Without Axel's constant moral protest and humanity, Lidenbrock would quickly devolve into a purely monomaniacal force, utterly devoid of self-preservation. Axel's fear, in a perverse way, keeps Lidenbrock human and thus, alive. The core conflict in their personalities reveals the true stakes. Axel's primary fear is the fear of death, the natural, ultimate consequence, while Lidenbrock's greatest fear is the fear of humiliation or failure, the social, imposed consequence. This makes Axel the honest explorer, focused on the true danger, while Lidenbrock is the false conqueror, focused on social validation. The ultimate act of survival, Axel's acceptance of chaos and his surrender to the storm and magma, is successful precisely because it is rooted in his initial fear. His anxiety taught him the vastness of the forces at play, allowing him to easily recognize the moment where absolute powerlessness was the only logical choice. Lidenbrock surrenders reluctantly, railing against the chaos. Axel surrenders logically, recognizing the force majeure. The profound truth is that the traditional epic, where fear is purged, is replaced by a modern narrative where fear is honored. Axel's persistent emotional record validates the risk in a way that Lidenbrock's dry geological log never could. Axel is the intellectual center of the journey, the one who processes and contextualizes the data psychologically, while Lidenbrock is merely the physical catalyst who forced the terrifying machinery into motion. The triumph of the reluctant hero is the subtle, powerful message of Verne. The most essential voice in the scientific age is the one who dares to say, "I am terrified," because that vulnerability is the only true measure of danger and the only reliable path to human truth. The triumphant return to the surface is not the end of the narrative, it is the beginning of the cover-up. Axel carries the trauma, the authentic, unvarnished cost of the adventure, while Lidenbrock attempts to sanitize the history. This dichotomy reveals the final truth about Verne's narrative strategy. The professor's courage was a performance for the scientific world, but Axel's fear was the reality for the human soul. Lidenbrock immediately begins his sanitized narrative revision. He meticulously removes every detail of Axel's terror, every instance of panic, and every moment of his own near-fatal recklessness from the official account. He deliberately eliminates the human, vulnerable element. Why? Because fear is a sign of weakness in the scientific world, and the professor cannot allow his triumph to be measured by anything other than unwavering control. He replaces anxiety with scientific perseverance, and terror with calculated risk. But Lidenbrock's censorship is futile. The quiet victory of the narrator is secured in Axel's private journal, which preserves the unvarnished truth. Axel's written record of the sublime dangers, the crushing claustrophobia, the existential dread of the time prison, the primal horror of the sea monsters, remains the definitive account. His journal is the ethical counter-narrative, standing as a private monument to the emotional cost Lidenbrock refuses to acknowledge. This highlights Verne's core ethical warning: true exploration must acknowledge its emotional toll. A scientific victory that ignores the profound fear and anxiety of the experience is an incomplete and fundamentally dishonest discovery. Axel's emotional record provides the missing data, the human measurement, of the journey's vaster scale. The reader's profound connection to this novel exists precisely because the story is filtered through the lens of honesty, fear. We trust Axel because he lies about nothing concerning his internal state. His vulnerability is the ultimate guarantor of his reliability. This profound psychological insight leads us to the conclusion that courage is not the absence of fear, but the precise, honest recording of it. Axel's anxiety remains the most reliable emotional barometer of the journey's sublime and terrifying nature. Axel's quiet victory is not celebrated by the world, but it is deeply integrated into his character. He returns home with the private knowledge that vulnerability is the ultimate measure of strength. He learned that the scientific pursuit of certainty is an endless, anxious loop, and that true sanity lies in recognizing limits and the sheer power of external forces. He survived because he yielded, not because he resisted. The lasting lesson is that the most vital voice in the age of science and ambition is the one who dares to say, "I am terrified." This voice is the essential check against the professor's reckless hubris. Lidenbrock conquered the earth, Axel conquered the terror the earth presented, and in doing so, he became the true hero of consciousness. We have seen how Axel's fear validated the journey, and how Lidenbrock's courage was merely a mask. We learn that vulnerability is the foundation of genuine truth. But what about your own life? Are you hiding your own internal Axel's fear behind the facade of professional courage and relentless Lidenbrockian drive? Are you censoring your own vulnerability for the sake of a dishonest victory? We ask you, what terrifying truth are you refusing to record? If this analysis of vulnerability as strength resonates with your own journey, share this critique. Subscribe to the Emotive Archive. We will continue to dissect the masters, revealing the hidden psychological truths, challenging you to recognize the power in your own fear.